Today, we're going to talk a little bit about feeding gear. Um, and part of why I wanted to do this chat was because I remember when I was looking at feeding gear for my kids, the market felt so oversaturated, and I was just completely overwhelmed with the amount of items available. And I felt like I would have really benefited from having a little bit more structure of like, these are the main things that you need, not just in terms of like, okay, you need like a bib and a plate and things like that, but you need items that are really going to set you up for the next several years, so you're not just constantly buying new items. And so this has been stuff that I've recommended many, many times over the years and have used with my own kids. And I am presenting this with Auggie, which is an amazing platform for families. And so let's dive in. So just to acknowledge, as I kind of mentioned earlier, the baby feeding gear market is completely oversaturated and super overwhelming. You can see here that it was valued at 38 billion in 2024, and by 2033, which is what is that? 7 years from now, it's going to like almost double that. Um, and yes, some of that is bottles, which I'm not going to be specifically talking about today, but then you've got your high chairs, your sippy cups, your utensils. I don't know the last time you looked something up on like Amazon or Buy Buy Baby. It's just like there's so much to choose from. And a lot of it, unfortunately, is also plastic, which we're learning more and more about how, well, we know that that's not great for the environment, but not great for, us in terms of the amount of microplastics that we're consuming from our foods. And so, like I said, we're going to kind of talk about some of the big things today, the big ticket items that you want to get and that are hopefully carry you through toddlerhood. Woo. Okay. So first, we'll talk about a high chair. So kids spend a lot of time in their high chair. Um, I recommend kids sitting in a high chair at the table, as opposed to like feeding on your lap or feeding on the floor. One, because we really want to start getting kids into routines. We know that they function best with routines. And the routine of just, it's time to eat. Where do we sit? We sit at the table in a safe place, right? A high chair. And so picking a high chair that's gonna, again, like be able to carry you, through the next many years is ideal. So when we look at high chairs, you want to choose something that is going to be ideal for both posture and comfort. So obviously, choking is a huge concern that a lot of us parents have. And why is choking such a huge concern? It's because it's warranted, right? We're very concerned about choking. It's one of the main things that can affect children and sadly kill them. And so when we think about choking, we want to make sure that our kids are sitting upright, they're stable with their hips, their knees, and they also have ankle support. So kind of the best example I can give you is if you're going to a bar and you're sitting at a bar stool and there's kind of no place for you to sit your feet on. So you're not really sitting at a right angle, your feet are kind of dangling and you're sort of more leaning over the bar or leaning back or leaning to the side. You're not as stable as if you have a place or a footrest for your foot. Now, babies at 6 months are not going to have that. But as they grow, you can kind of see the difference between these two chairs. You have one where, there is more of that stability as opposed to the type of chair that your feet are just dangling. Also, this helps to engage your core, which, will prevent sort of that slumping and keep them a little bit more comfortable. Stable feet is really going to be important for a stable body. And with a stable body, kids are able to kind of focus more and concentrate more on eating. They're able to focus more. Their brain power can go less into trying to keep them stable and more into the practice of chewing and swallowing and coordinating hand and eye movements, bringing food to their mouth, especially if you're going down a path of more of a baby-led weaning where you're starting with whole pieces of food as opposed to more purees. This will help with self-feeding, and allow them to, reduce some of that frustration of, wow, I'm like have to focus on my food, but I also have to focus on firing up my muscles to sit safely. Again, we talked about from a safety perspective, when children feel unstable, they are not able to eat as safely. It can also cause them to just be uncomfortable and want to kind of escape the high chair and get up and leave. And the idea of having a high chair that has a footrest when we're talking about long-term usability, this is going to be the most ideal. This is the type of chair that's really going to be able to grow with your baby as they get bigger. Now, I've had people ask me, well, what about when I'm traveling? Or what about those chairs that kind of clip on to the counter? So, yeah, there are times where, it's not ideal. It's not like you go to a restaurant, right? And they only have a high chair that either your kid's feet are dingling or you bring your little clip-on chair. These things are gonna, come and go, and there is some flexibility to it. What we're talking about now is really a chair that is going to, like I said, be around that 4 to 6 months mark when you're starting to introduce your kid sitting in a chair. That you're going to want to try to get something that's really going to provide them with the best support and stability. All right, so we've picked out our chair, and now we want to talk a little bit about utensils. And why are utensils so important? Well, they're kind of the key to helping with that fine motor skill development as well as hand-eye coordination. We know that, using tools like spoons, it's a bit of a gradual progression, which we're seeing here. Things like, you start with grabbing objects when kids are playing and bringing them to their mouth, and we can transition that to food and then transitioning that to types of utensils. Really, I would say spoons are kind of the best thing to start with as opposed to forks because they're a little bit more softer in terms of your gum, right? You don't want like a sharp part of the fork kind of causing some kind of discomfort for your baby in its mouth. You also don't really want to start with something like metal. The main reason is because metal retains temperature much more so than something like silicone. And so things like temperature of being hot and or being cold, kids' mouths are very sensitive, and we want them to really more focus on the sensory exploration of the flavor and less about like, ooh, the spoon is obviously hot is going to be problematic or even too cold. So we're going to kind of push metal a little bit further down the line into toddlerhood. So when you start, again, you are welcome to introduce spoons and or any type of cutlery around the 6 to 9 month mark. Your baby at that point is not going to be able to pick it up and hold it the same way that they will as they get closer to 1 or even closer to 2. However, with everything, kids need practice. So if you want to have that spoon, the first one here on the I think it's also your left is called a num num utensil, but you can get anything that's kind of it's probably 3 inches, has a nice little small grip for baby to hold on to. But that grip, your baby's probably gonna throw it, gonna drop it, not gonna hold it, not know which end to hold it from. And all of that is totally normal, developmentally normal. They're not yet going to be able to scoop food independently. So at this point, a lot of it is kind of practicing with a preloaded spoon. You can bring it close to baby's mouth and sort of hold it up to baby's mouth and let them come to the spoon and take things off. Or you can just preload a spoon and you can put it on the tray and allow baby to do what they want with it. You can also model, right? So you're preloading the spoon and you're bringing it to your lips and you're kind of modeling for your baby how you're doing that. And that's really what we look at for early exposure around that 6 to 9 month mark. As you transition closer towards first birthday, you might see that babies show a lot more interest in utensils and they're interested more in that autonomy of bringing that spoon to their mouth. This is a really exciting time as kids start to gain independence. And again, I would hold off on metal and really focus on something that's going to be, agile. Again, not silicone. Not a huge fan of plastic. Again, back to the note that I made earlier, but also just because plastic is still kind of a harder feeling inside of a baby's mouth. There are so many different types of silicone style spoons now that you can get. Also good for babies like teething that they can kind of gnaw on and chew on. And then as you transition more into the 12 to 18 month mark, you're going to see a lot more interest in self-feeding. And if you don't see that interest, then this is the time to really foster it by always offering a spoon. So it's still going to be very messy. You're still going to have baby probably dropping spoon, throwing it. Maybe this time it's a little more of that like, what is gravity? Or like I'm getting a reaction out of mom and dad, so I'm going to keep doing this. This would be a nice time to also maybe start to introduce a fork. Again, you can find forks that are a little bit more agile, not something that's going to be so hard like metal. And then I would say kind of heading into the 2 year mark is when you're going to start to have that fork and that spoon to help with increasing comfortable use of a fork and spoon. You're going to see a decrease in spills, especially things with like rice, for example, which is really hard with a spoon, giving them lots of time to practice. And stainless steel silverware sort of becomes most appropriate at that age. Obviously, you're still going to make sure that the soup is not too hot or the chicken. Um, and the items you're offering is not super cold. The goal is really by the time your kids are about 2 to 3 years, that they are able to confidently use utensils and they've had a lot of time to practice using them. And these are skills that are just going to keep maturing as they are in the preschool years. All right, let's talk about plates and bowls. Do you need one? Do you not need one? Great question, Jira. The answer is that you absolutely don't need one at the beginning. If you have a tray on your high chair and you just want to start with putting things on the tray and allowing baby to kind of explore, that is totally fine. Even like yogurt, yes, you can just put like a glob of yogurt on the tray and kind of let your baby explore with it. However, if you feel better with something that is a bowl or a plate, then I recommend choosing something that is suctioned because again, your baby has very sporadic movements and is not, necessarily able to know that the bowl is suctioned. They might, once they even realize that it's suctioned, spend a lot of time and energy trying to pull that plate which can distract from feeding time. So that might not always be ideal. But regardless, you're going to want something that is going to suction to the ground. And again, there's no bowl on here, but having a bowl is great too for things like baby cereal or yogurt or any type of like soups, like if you're doing a pea soup or a black bean soup or something like that. I have spent some time talking to people about whether to go the direction of a segmented plate and or more of an open plate and kind of this idea of like, well, does one influence picky eating over the other? The idea that when you have this segmented plate, you've kind of separated all of your foods out and how does that affect picky eating, right? So kids who maybe are a little bit more sensory, they don't want any of their foods touching, as opposed to just from the beginning, you're sort of putting all the foods together with this idea that foods can touch and mix and it's not a big deal. There's not a whole lot of research on this. However, there is one major study that has been quoted kind of the most, which actually shows that a segmented and or divided plate increased intake of vegetables compared to just open plain plates. And it was done at a preschool of kids ages 3 to 5. I think there were like 235 kids that participated in the study, and they gave, some of the kids segmented plates versus open plates. And what they noticed is that when there's a little bit more of a visual organization, some kids were opted more to eat items off of specific segments. So that is something to think about in terms of when you're choosing. Again, there's really no strong evidence to say a divided plate versus an open plate is going to prevent picky eating versus the other. We don't, most research that's done on picky eating is really focused on exposure and parenting styles, less of how food is presented. What I will say is that having food kind of separated on a plate can help with a couple things, especially at the beginning. So one is that kids can be very overwhelmed, especially when we start out, baby, 6 months, you have a ton of different food items on the plate and it's all mixed together. You want to start with small portions, even like a teaspoon or 2 to 3 pieces of an item as you're, even transitioning closer towards one. And sometimes having that on a little bit of a segment plate or segmented, right? Like even on a open plate or on the tray can help meals to feel less overwhelming and help children to sort of clearly see that there's different components on the plate. So again, kind of reducing that overwhelm. The other thing is that this can help with something called food chaining, which as we transition into, if you have kids who are picky eaters or you're struggling with picky eating, food training is kind of a big exposure strategy that feeding therapists use, which is this idea that you're gradually introducing similar foods. And sometimes that can help when you're doing it in a segmented way. So for a good example would be, okay, my kid eats apples, but they don't eat any other fruits. So we're going to start with some apple slices in one segment, and then maybe we're offering apples in a different way visually in another segment, and or maybe we've transitioned to pears in another segment that are cut the same way as apples. Pears are also crunchy. They can look similar to apples. So it's used in as an exposure strategy in feeding therapy. That's another way that sort of segmented plates work. And so, like I said, we don't have a ton of like solid evidence, but I would say you could say, oh, we're going to get one segmented, one not. We're going to even just start without segmented plates. Obviously, as you transition more into toddler years, you're going to ideally kind of tune back on the segmented plates. Kids can even start to eat on your plates if you're not having, glass. Obviously, anything that is going to be a hazard, but transitioning more to a style plate than an adult would eat. All right, so let's move on to cups. There are so many different cups out there. I think the biggest thing is like, do I get a straw sippy cup or do I get an open cup? Do I get both? Here on the left, I also showed you an example of something that's called the Honey Bear Straw Cup, which is used again when feeding therapists, but also can be something that can help with, babies don't initially know how to suck water up of a straw. The idea is that you kind of squeeze the honey bear a little bit and to help the water come up the straw to sort of help baby if you're, that this is an example of something that's pretty short-lived. So you could use this for a month or 2 to 3 months, but then after that, you're going to transition to a different style cup. The big idea is with like pediatric dentists and or infant feeding, guidance is you want to pretty much start to introduce a cup between 6 to 9 months or whenever you are starting to introduce solids. The idea is just like we talked about with routines, right? Kids are not going to know how to drink out of an open cup right away. They're not going to know how to drink out of a straw cup or a sippy cup. However, we need to give them lots of opportunity to practice and lots of opportunity with that routine, that visual routine. Okay, I'm seeing my water cup presented with my food at meals. So that's going to be around the 6 to 9 month mark. If we're talking about bottles, or even if we're talking about, you can see here in the middle, you have a straw top option and you have a sippy cup top option. If you are starting with a sippy cup top option, the recommendation is also to phase this out similar to bottles, somewhere between 12 to 18 months. If you can, closer to 12 months, it can be a challenging transition for kids. And happy to, people are struggling with that, happy to provide you with some tips because that can be a difficult transition. So really these types of sippy style spout cups, they are acceptable, but they're more of a short-term transition tool to help with kids. Their extended use is not as much encouraged. You're going to want to opt for a straw cup. And the main idea of that is that, again, pediatric dentists, feeding therapists feel like they kind of promote this idea of immature sucking patterns, kind of more similar to a bottle. It can possibly cause delayed or altered speech articulation, some different issues with tongue posture and like muscle use in the mouth. Again, whether we have like concrete research to support that, we don't. However, that is sort of the general recommendation that you will hear from those specialties. And so ideally, you're looking at something more that is a straw cup, whether you say we're going to start with a straw from the beginning and or an open style cup, especially anything other than water. If you're someone who is using juice, or maybe you have a constipated baby and you have to use a little bit of prune juice, you want to really make sure that you're doing it in an open cup and or a straw cup, because the sippy spout style cup is just doing kind of similar to a bottle, or a nipple is going to encourage a much higher consumption of that. So these two, the straw cup and the open cup, are really going to support mature drinking skills and oral motor development a little bit better. And like I said, you want to give them lots of opportunity to practice. The emphasis is really moving them towards the direction of an open cup, but no kid is going to be able to, no 6-month-old is going to be able to have an open cup. This takes a lot of practice. Again, modeling, parents, caregivers modeling how to hold it, but also as their fine motor skills, gross motor skills develop, they're going to be able to hold that cup and bring that cup to their lips a little bit better. So having sort of one of each is great. Again, the market for sippy cups and or straw cups is vast. There are a lot of plastic options out there. What I would say, especially in the beginning, is that water is going to sit in that cup sometimes all day long. And if you are concerned with having water sitting in a cup all day long, then a better option might be to opt for something like silicone or I don't know if they make it anymore, but you can get like glass cups that are then surrounded in silicone. If baby throws it, it won't break so that the water is sitting in glass. Because again, they're really not going to be drinking much in the beginning because this is a skill that does take a lot of practice. All right, let's jump into bibs. Do you need a bib? Do you not need a bib? Bibs are great for protecting clothing and for helping to contain some of the mess. You also can feed your baby naked in the beginning or have like a white onesie because feeding is very messy, or have a white onesie that is just, this is our feeding onesie. This gets totally destroyed. The silicone bibs they're so cute and they come in lots of patterns. They're great for catching food because they have these wide pockets. However, with a new baby to starting solids, they are very bulky, and I do not recommend them in the beginning just because they take up so much physical space that can kind of inhibit baby from being able to explore in the way that we want it to. So I would just, transition into maybe more of a silicone style, bigger bib, but really in the beginning, something that's just, kind of to protect their clothing or the top of their body. These little packets are going to maybe collect some food, especially for, again, doing baby-led weaning. You have bigger chunks of food. You can scoop that out and sort of put that back on the tray. Kids do resist bibs if you're not there yet, or maybe you've noticed kid is tugging at the bib, pulling it off. So in some ways they can, be a little bit more frustrating or for baby and for mom or parent than, something that is, if you didn't have anything there. But I would say, it's up to you. It definitely helps to reduce some of the mess and, like we talked about, protect the clothing. But really just being mindful of when you have things that are sort of hindering baby from being able to really explore, then we've sort of lost sight of, what is the idea of a bib here. So just be mindful of that. If you have all these beautiful silicone bibs that you're excited to try, maybe hold off on those a little bit until kids are, I would say, probably closer to between 12 and 24 months. All right, baby teethers. This is my youngest. I don't know if this works. Let's see. Enjoying nope, not really. Maybe a little bit. Um, Enjoying a mesh baby feeder. So what I would say about this is I love baby feeders. I definitely recommend investing in one, especially in the beginning. Yes, it maybe will only take you through a couple of months, but these are excellent ways to introduce flavors and introduce new foods. They're also super safe if you're someone who's feeling a lot of concern about choking and introduction of solids. These are really safe ways to introduce flavor. You can, if you have a baby who's teething, you can take these fillable feeders and you can then, fill them with something and put them in the refrigerator or put them in the freezer so that they're cold. Again, coldness is good to soothe some of these sore gums when you have new teeth emerging. Like I said, they're really safe ways to introduce new flavors. So instead of like just putting carrots in there, you could put carrots with dill. Instead of just putting strawberry, you could mix strawberry yogurt and mint. So you can put a variety of different things into these baby feeders. They're also great for encouraging self-feeding and motor skills. So don't, shy away from a feeder being like, but it's not a spoon, but it still helps with fine motor skills. It still helps with hand-eye coordination. It still helps with that independence, right? Being able to pick something out and bring it up to my mouth. You don't have to sit there and, help baby so much. You can kind of allow them to do it themselves. So this is a really nice stepping stone towards more self-feeding with utensils and finger foods. It's an amazing source of sensory exploration. So you can see like it's so messy, but it's great because baby is just going all in and embracing both the flavor and texture, but also the taste, the touch, the smell. So it's a huge, sensory exploration. And there might be times where you are eating a meal, you want baby to participate in that meal. Baby's feeling super cranky in the high chair and is just like being really fussy. And you could say, let's just get that feeder out. We're not ready to take baby out of the chair. And so you can give them help to keep your baby engaged at the table by giving them some kind of a feeder while you're able to, enjoy your meal and still have them be present. So highly recommend investing in some kind of this one is a mesh one, but you can get them a silicone. They have, different size holes at the top to engage in. All right. So let's move on to maybe a little bit out of the early feeding phase, and we're kind of heading more into that 12 to 24 month, or maybe even 24 plus, where you have, kids have experimented, we've introduced all of the foods and they're eating. However, you're starting to see signs of more selectiveness, or maybe we want to use that word picky eating, but you have kids who are just, they're going through what we call food jags, which is you're feeling like you're just serving the same foods all the time. They're requesting the same foods all the time, over and over, week after week. So they're only wanting one food at every meal. They're demanding suddenly pasta can only be plain or can only be buttered. And you're feeling like you're getting a little frustrated by that. So these are totally normal. They often are, well, they're developmentally normal. They also have to do a lot with control. Kids, wanting to have more control over their food. When we push back, we only make it worse. They're not, generally harmful as these phases happen, especially if your child continues to grow. But what are some helpful strategies that can help you go through it? So what we know is that play-based, sensory, exploratory approaches to food can really help children to become more willing and interested to interact with foods. And so what that looks like is giving them opportunities to engage with the food in different ways. So maybe that is cutting foods into different shapes, or even giving them the tools to cut foods into different shapes. It could be using different style toothpicks, or they make, different forks with different characters or things on it. Or it could be something as simple as tongs, right? Kids love that autonomy. They love being able to help serve you, serve me. So maybe you're serving the foods a little bit more family style, and you have, different like silly tongs that they can, use to help serve you and help serve them. I've had a lot of battles. I've seen this both with clients and with my own kids. We're suddenly battling over, I hate this meal. I hate this meal. Okay, you go choose your fork, or let's break out some of the car Q-tips. I have boys, so they love like their cars. Let's get the little car. I just said Q-tips, but I meant toothpicks. The car toothpicks. And suddenly that struggle that we were having over, oh, I hate what you're serving. We've looked past that. We're now excited with the tools that we have to engage in the food a little bit more differently. So I would say, on top of sort of like structured activities, which we're not going to delve into so much today, if you're looking for some simple things to invest in, sometimes having stuff that is a little bit more playful, you're not necessarily changing the variety of the food that you're offering, but you're changing the variety that is visually appealing on the table. And this could really help both with food jags or just some of those mealtime battles. And then the other thing that I want to touch on is exposure to your children in the kitchen through food prep and or cooking and or helping you cook. So again, this kind of ties into that selectiveness or that picky eating, but we know there's so much to support that cooking together is linked to greater food variety. And so engaging your kids in I would say investing in a toddler knife. There's tons of plastic options out there. I've provided you with a couple that aren't, but inviting your kid to participate in the kitchen by cutting foods that are appropriate. So bananas are a great one, watermelon, even tofu, right? You might be like, my child would never eat tofu. Okay, but we're still like, we have to start somewhere with exposing them to that tofu, right? So you're having tofu for dinner. Can baby come and or baby, sorry, can your child come and help you cut that with their knife, cut it into squares or different shapes, put it in the bowl, mix it with a marinade. So this can help them to just visually And from touch and smell as well, be exposed to new things. It again, as I mentioned, it's tied to less picky eating behaviors, but it also helps to fuel connection, right? So we're always looking for ways to connect with our kids over eating and feeding. A lot of times people will say, like, wow, like there's so much pressure in family meals. We have to have these family meals, but then family meals can feel like a battle. So where is that? The point of then family meals has been lost, right? If we're no longer really connecting with our kids. And so if you can sort of backtrack and say, okay, well, meals have become a big struggle, but we're going to, I'm going to invite my child to come cook with me in the kitchen. So getting a couple of tools, as I said, like even just a toddler knife could be all that it takes, and pulling up a chair to the counter and having them kind of help you to prep. You're going to connect so much more with your child in that stress-free, relaxed environment. If your goal is to expose them to new foods, than you will at the table if suddenly they're sitting down and it's like this battle to get them to just even physically sit at the table. So really, highly, highly recommend getting something like this. It helps with exposure, familiarity. It gives kids autonomy. It helps to develop skills, confidence, makes them feel like they have ownership over what it is that they're cooking, and also just overall contributes to that positive mealtime experience, which is really what, a lot of us are all looking for. And those are really the big ones. Um, so let me see. I'm going to end my slideshow here and stop my screen sharing. Those are the big things, and you might be like, "Wait, you're missing a lot of topics." And if you are, I'm happy to let's see if there's any questions in the chat or you want to jump on. But those are kind of the big ones that I am going to recommend that you look at. There's a lot of other stuff that we can touch on, but in terms of if you're thinking from like development and, like we talked about pickiness and selectiveness, and new exposure, those are the things that I would hit up. Does anyone have any questions? Any thoughts on things helping a baby who throws their plate as soon as they are done? Oof, yes. Um, okay, so a couple things. One is, well, how old is your baby? Okay, 15 months. Yeah, so I was gonna say, like, this is very much a developmental stage. We need to teach baby other ways to communicate to us that they're all done. So I know it's sign language, it's this, and you can just like model, like, show me that you're all done, or other ways to, you might have a word or something if 15-month-old is talking, but we want to teach them that there's another way for them to communicate to us that they are all done. What I would say is your reaction is also a big part of it. So if they're throwing the plate on the floor and you're getting angry and you're like, stop doing that, sometimes it becomes like, ooh, I'm getting a reaction out of mom when I'm doing this, and going to keep doing this and then look at mom and kind of see what I can get a reaction out of. So keeping yourself calm and just kind of calmly, monotonously telling baby, this is, we don't throw our plate on the floor. If you're done, there's another way. Another thing that can help is if you're feeding them on a tray, you could cut out a little circle, like a colored circle. And both where the plate goes or where the water bottle goes, and maybe there's kind of like a clicking noise that you're like, when you're done. Sorry, I'm realizing this is like zooming crazy close in my face. When you're done, you just tell baby, like, just put it on the circle to show me that you're all done. So take your water bottle, put it on the circle. They can go click, or you can go click, like that shows me that you're done with your water, because that's another one that a lot of kids love to throw. It could be the same thing with your plate. So putting your plate on that circle that you've created, whether that circle is, off to the side of the tray or in the middle, to sort of tell you, like, when you're done, you just take your plate and you put it on the circle, and we make like a funny noise or something like that, and that tells me that you're done eating. So that would be another thing, kind of more of a playful approach that you could try. My 12-month-old is in the same boat. Yeah. Yeah. It's it's a frustrating phase, but the best that we can do is not show our frustration with it, because a lot of it is, I'm getting a reaction out of you, and I'm starting to realize that I can test limits, right? So if we continue to fuel that limit testing by reacting to it, we can make it worse, which I know is hard. Any other questions? This is helpful about salads, and there's so much on the market. Oh my God, yes, it's crazy. And as we just saw, it's like really growing. So, and it's hard not to just go click happy on Amazon, which is definitely where I've gone down. So I'm happy that I saved you money too. We've done straw cups for a while and seem to have trouble finding a balance between too small when they get frustrated with how much is coming out, and then too big when she chokes. So yeah, so I would say, have you tried an open cup, Lindsay? I don't know. There you are. Um, yeah. So this, like, I mean, drinking out of a straw takes a lot of practice. I have two kids, and one of my sons, like within 3 weeks, was sipping out of a straw, and then the other one, I still have videos at 12 months, would like sip the water up and then just open his mouth, and the water would just dribble out. Like, could not figure out that mechanism. So, what I would say is it's a skill that just takes a lot of time. Yeah, it is harder to have it hang around all day. Um, I don't know. This is a little bit challenging. I would say if you want, you can email me the cups that you have and we can look at the different options. That honey bear, if you've been at this for a while, that honey bear style cup might be a little bit helpful for you to just help squeeze a little bit of water into, I think you said you have a daughter. Yeah, into her mouth, and see if that helps. Um, That might be the direction to go, but as I said, like this is a skill that can take some time. So you might be like, this week the bigger straw is a little bit challenging, but next week suddenly we've mastered it. And so it just, I agree that an open cup is harder, especially if you're on the go. But maybe start with that, go back a little bit and see if that honey bear cup is helpful. Yeah, of course. Any other questions? All right. You're welcome. Thank you guys for tuning in. I know someone mentioned they were from Seattle, but here in New York, it's everyone's home. We're all stuck inside. So I hope if you do have a snow day that you're being cozy, and I loved chatting with you guys. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Bye, everyone.